So it's been going on 7 years of All Elite Wrestling, and somehow the same takes have been recycled from 2019 to 2020 and are still being used this year. There are takes from people who were saying that AEW would have been dead in a few months that are still being spread around and said to this day. What's crazy is I even tested it myself. I searched just AEW on TikTok, and I still find the same types of weird critiques popping up over and over again. Most of them are from people who openly say that they don't even watch the show weekly. And most of these takes are completely mal, or uninformed, or completely invalid today. And I think that's where the problem starts, because a lot of the criticism floating around right now isn't even based on what AEW is this year or what it was last year or the year before that. It's based on what people who haven't watched since 2022 or 2021 still assume it is, I guess. And those things include AEW has no stories, AEW is just flips and no psychology, AEW is just ex-WWE guys, nobody knows who AEW wrestlers are, and the last one has been said since AEW was conceptualized. And it's got to be the most uninformed one I've ever heard said in any context. So I want to start with the no stories argument. 7 years later, and this is still getting thrown around constantly. It completely ignores how AEW storytelling works or has ever worked. AEW doesn't lack stories and never really has lacked stories. It doesn't tell them in the same structure that I guess people have expected after 40 years of the same style. Right now, AEW's storytelling tends to fall into one of a few clear lanes. There's character-driven arcs through promos and presentation. There's match-first storytelling with in-ring psychology as the narrative. And then there's the hybrid main event style storytelling with big promos, big matches, and generally a long-term arc payoff. There's character-driven arcs through promos and presentation, like Toni Storm evolving her timeless persona into one of the more layered long-term character stories in professional wrestling. And Darby Allin continuing a career-defining arc built around risk, resilience, and defying odds, even in the face of top-tier competition, challenges way bigger than him and beyond him, like Mount Everest and Brody King times like 3, and even winning the AEW World Championship when nobody believed he could. Match first storytellers include Will Ospreay in AEW's main event scene, where matches against big opponents like Swerve Strickland or Bryan Danielson style competitors are built around who will be the better man in this upcoming big match, whether that's physical, mental, you name it. Konosuke Takeshita, whose rise is completely defined by in-ring dominance and a wide and total shift in his crowd perception. There's Kyle Fletcher, who's representing a newer wave of AEW's in-ring focused future stars. And both members of Jet Speed, who showed up out of different portions of the world, completely separate career paths, merged together into a tag team, and are both still very dominant singles competitors in the ring. There's Bandito, continuing to show how Lucha Libre-based storytelling can still carry emotional weight in AEW television. And then there's your hybrid, your main event style storytelling, with people like Jon Moxley, whose entire character is built through violence, endurance, changing the industry with his bare hands rather than the traditional promo-heavy style. He's got very slow, dark, and articulated speech with a very cerebral pacing. You've got Adam Page, whose long-term redemption and identity arc continuing to be one of AEW's foundational stories, as well as putting on phenomenal singles, tag team, and death matches. You've got MJF, who evolved from pure cocky heel promos into a more layered, self-aware main event character, also putting on some of the best matches in AEW history. You've got Swerve Strickland, who's currently positioned as a top-tier main event star through character work, presentation, and in-ring evolution, all tied together. And then you've got the Young Bucks, one of the more melodramatic characters in all of wrestling, who blend their storytelling with real-time character shifting and put on some of the best tag team matches in wrestling history. Often the argument is more so AEW has too many stories rather than it's missing stories, because it's not just telling them in a linear, over-explained TV drama format where they have to recap everything 5 times every week. But, of course, AEW is still more match-focused than most traditional American TV wrestling promotion. That's never changed. But that also leads into the next outdated take: no psychology, no selling, just flips. Yeah, I'm probably going to have to dedicate an entire video to this another time, but for now, this one kind of ignores the foundation of AEW's style. The no psychology argument is usually coming from clipped highlights instead of watching full matches, and the selling versus no selling thing gets misunderstood constantly. AEW doesn't operate in one specific style, so different wrestlers with different philosophies coexisting on the same roster is going to get you something different than what you would traditionally see on like a TNA or a WWE. Which naturally leads into the next argument, which people have loved to throw out about AEW, and that it is just ex-WWE guys. Obviously, yes, since its inception, some of the talent in AEW have been former WWE wrestlers. That's just how the industry works. So the question I would beg to ask is, if someone leaves what's considered the biggest stage in wrestling, what are they supposed to do? Sit at home and wait? Or attempt to reinvent themselves somewhere else? Because AEW in 2026 is filled with both reinvention success stories like Swerve Strickland is coming from being a top name in NXT into a lower card name in the main roster to a full main event world title level star. Toni Storm reinventing herself maybe 4 times over after leaving WWE. After being pie-faced, you've got Ricochet transitioning into a more character-driven, faction-leading, high-level featured role and champion. You got Claudio Castagnoli, who's remained one of the most respected in-ring performers in the industry. And you've got John Moxley winning gold literally all over the world. Pac continuing to evolve as one of AEW's most dangerous and beloved long-term performers. You've also got non-WWE built stars like you've got MJF, a fully AEW made main event heel turned top attraction. You've got Adam Page, who's AEW's long-term storytelling anchor. You got Darby Allin, who's a completely homegrown AEW original. Willow Nightingale, as well as Megan Bayne, coming in AEW as enhancement talent or AEW dark featured talent and becoming some of the top stars in the division. So the idea that AEW is just ex-WWE guys ignores half the roster and ignores who's been the base and foundation of the company since 2019. I think it's ironic that when someone leaves a top promotion and goes to another one, they're all of a sudden considered less valuable by some of the viewers. And on top of that, there's been a dueling take I've seen from the same people saying that AEW is just ex-WWE guys, being that nobody knows AEW wrestlers. Nobody knows them usually means you haven't been watching long enough to recognize how far they've grown. Because AEW's obviously built recognizable stars over time. MJF's a mainstream heel character in wrestling culture. Darby Allin's one of the most visually recognizable risk-based performers in the industry. Partnerships like Swerve and the Young Bucks with Reebok, Brody King and Adidas, Kenny Omega and Street Fighter, and Will Ospreay and Assassin's Creed. I don't think these big brands would put all this time and effort into these wrestlers if they didn't know who they were. And due to the fact that AEW has succeeded in creating certain new TV wrestling stars and are currently setting up for a very high-profile new generation of wrestlers, this last take is an especially uninformed one that people have been saying since 2019, and that is that AEW is dying. This one's almost always driven by headlines, podcast clips, or narrative content, not what's actually happening week to week. AEW obviously isn't perfect, nothing is. But if your opinion is still based on things that haven't been true for years or were never really fully true in the first place, then you're criticizing nothing. You're criticizing a version of AEW that only exists in these podcast clips, headlines, and recycled old social media takes. And if you actually want to understand what AEW looks like in 2026, you have to watch it as it is now, not as it was described some years ago. If you really want to see how an AEW pay-per-view looks in the crowd, you can watch my AEW Revolution vlog from last year, or you can watch my AEW Revolution vlog from this year. Now get off my video.